There's a very important case just out from the Supreme Court, Fulton versus Philadelphia. It's a big victory for religious freedom. Essentially, the case involved the city of Philadelphia denying foster care contracts to Catholic groups that, quote, discriminated against same-sex couples. In other words, they were not willing to place foster children with gay couples. And the city said, okay, well, then no contracts for you. So the Catholics group sued, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. A couple of significant things about this. One, the ruling was 9-0. And what this means is that even the so-called liberals, even the Democratic nominees, they all went the same way. And I think that there is a deeper significance here. The significance is that the court is sort of slapping down the left in its insistence that the court is horribly fractured, reflects the partisan divisions of society, represents some kind of Republican effort to stack the court, justifies the Democrats from their side packing the court. And the court is basically saying that no, not just on trivial issues. By the way, the court has had a number of 9-0 rulings recently. It's almost like they feel the need to speak as a unified group. But in this case, it's even more significant because here we're not talking about a relatively secondary issue. We're talking about something that matters a lot to the left, namely gay rights. And the left is very insistent that religious groups be forced, compelled, to recognize these non-discrimination laws, and if they don't, to be excluded from government programs. But the Supreme Court has decided to not go along with that. And I think what the court is trying to say is, number one, as a court, we can insulate ourselves from political influence. In other words, here is a leftist, Professor Kent Greenfield. He says, the Supreme Court has become too partisan and unbalanced to trust it with deciding the most important issues of our day. And the court is saying, actually, we're not that fractured. We are able to decide things as a group, Republican and Democratic nominees together. The second thing that the court is saying, and I think this is equally important, is that this idea that you can use non-discrimination to cancel out the First Amendment, and we're talking here about the religious freedom clause of the First Amendment, the idea that you can use non-discrimination laws to override the Bill of Rights and tell people, religious groups, that you've got to set aside your conscience, this is not going to fly. Religious groups have every right on the basis of conscience to act in congruence with their conscience, and they do not give up, if you will, their citizenship rights by doing it. Now, the court, however, while making this important decision, stopped short in one respect. It stopped short in overruling a kind of important case that is we should overrule in order to truly affirm religious liberty. And that case is called the Smith case. It's called Employment Division versus Smith, circa 1990. That was a case that was kind of a blow for religious freedom. Now, you might think that that case would be authored by some unhinged leftist, but weirdly, it was authored by Justice Scalia. The case itself involved Native American groups. And the Native American groups, by and large, were saying that they could not be held accountable under the drug laws because their use of the drug peyote was, in fact, a kind of a religious ritual, that this was part of their religion. And Justice Scalia basically said, that's ridiculous. Justice Scalia said, listen, religious groups have got to kind of follow the law. And as long as the law is, quote, generally applicable, in other words, they're not being singled out to do something, no one is able to use these drugs. They can't just say, well, gee, non-religion drugs are okay. So in this seemingly kind of exceptional case, but the problem with it is that it set a precedent. And the precedent was that as long as a law is generally applicable, you can force religious groups to go along. And that's basically what the city of Philadelphia was trying to do. They're saying, we're not just forcing the Catholics to follow the no discrimination against gays principle. It's generally applicable. We're applying this to everybody. The court would have done well to go the full hog and overruled the Smith case and basically said, no, religious freedom, in a sense, takes precedence. That's really what conservatives were hoping that the Supreme Court would do. But the Supreme Court, while giving the victory to the Catholic groups in Philadelphia, nevertheless stopped short of overruling the Smith decision. They basically said, we don't need to go there. We're able to affirm religious freedom even within the orbit of the Smith decision. And so I see this as a victory for our side, but not a total victory. It's not a total victory. Why? Because even though we won on the facts presented, we weren't able to knock out the troublesome precedent that allows the left to try once again and in other contexts to get religious groups and try to force them to violate their conscience in order to conform with so-called anti-discrimination laws.